Oh, yeah.
I'm Matt Wiley, and it's my privilege this morning to introduce our speaker, Ron Corbett. Is known, I'm sure, to all of you. He served 13 years in the Iowa House, including 5 years as the Speaker of the House, and then served 6 years leading the Cedar Rapids Chamber of Commerce. Before then becoming the mayor of Cedar Rapids, now I think 8 years ago. He just last month announced that he was running for the governor position in Iowa. And on top of all those kinds of accomplishments, he is the author of a book that's come out, Beyond Promises, which I can recommend. And one of the things you learn in the book, besides learning about all these things, is that he, among his many other accomplishments, founded the Pepe's ice cream truck delivery company, ice cream delivery service, which I think, well, geez, I mean, how many accomplishments can one guy actually have? I think he's the perfect person to come and talk to us about in our series of positive politics. And it's a real privilege for me to introduce Mayor of Cedar Rapids, Ron Corbett.
Thank you and good morning. We have a little less than an hour together. I don't want to speak the whole time. I do want to have some questions from you, and maybe specific issues facing the city of Cedar Rapids that we're currently dealing with, or maybe issues that we've dealt with in the past, or maybe even a forecast of issues. You played that game tic-tac-toe before, right? And you play the game over and over again. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And there's never one person that wins every game of tic-tac-toe. Some people are better. Politics is kind of like that. And sometimes you win on a discussion or a debate of an issue, and sometimes you lose. And then another time you win, another time you lose, and it seems to almost be never ending in a way from year to year. Today's discussion really is about your involvement in the political process and the best way to be involved in the political process. And I've found over the years there are a lot of different ways that people can be active and feel like they not only just have a voice, but they actually have results in what their viewpoint or issue is that they're trying to advocate for. For me, I first got involved in 1984. That was a long time ago. I was a young man. Still a young man at 56, but I was really young. I started working for a guy who was a senator. His name was Roger Jepson. And he was running for re-election. And one of my friends asked me if I wanted to go and help pass out literature door to door. And so that's how I got involved in politics. I really didn't know too much about him at the time and his philosophies, but I kind of wanted to be active in the community, and got bit by the political bug and decided to run for the legislature myself. This is 1986, so I was 25 when I announced, and 26 years old when I got elected. And I look back and I wonder what motivated me at the time. And there were a lot of people leaving Iowa in the 80s. Those of you have been lifelong Iowans remember the farm crisis of the 1980s. Farmers were going broke, but it wasn't just farmers. There were a lot of young people. Iowa had 3 million people in 1980, and by 1990 we were down to 2.7 million people. A lot of people had left the state, 300,000 people during that decade. And my campaign theme was a young Iowan staying in Iowa. And it struck a chord with the voters of the northeast part of Cedar Rapids and Hiawatha and Palo and Center Point, my legislative district, and I got elected. There were some people during the course of that campaign that helped me out, so I want to give you a couple examples. And so our elected officials influenced by supporters? Are they influenced by donors? Are they influenced by organizations and groups? Are they sometimes influenced by people that are their oppositions? And I would say the answer to all of that is yes. They are influenced by all of that. I think most elected officials that I've either served with at the state level, and there were hundreds of them. I served for 13 years in the legislature. There's 150 House members, 50 Senate members, and when you have different elections over the course of 13 years, probably served with 300 different people. And then served with others that may not have been in my position, but other elected officials. And you get to know people that are other statewide office holders, and of course, local government, serving as mayor, city council people. So I would say the answer is all of the above. Most elected officials, when they run, have an idea of what they want to do on a handful of issues, but not every issue. So they're very, maybe uneducated would be too strong of a word, but just don't have the overall knowledge of a particular issue that may not be their favorite issue to talk about, but it's an issue that they're going to have to address during their time in office. And most people seek advice and counsel and input from citizens. Anyway, getting back to my first race, I had a lot of supporters, and this was during a time in Iowa where parents that wanted to homeschool their children weren't allowed to do that. That was against Iowa law. And as a matter of fact, they were throwing people in jail. You believe it or not, it seems hard to imagine that you would throw a parent in jail for trying to homeschool their child. But in Iowa, that's what was happening. And people were going to jail, and there was a bit of an outrage about that. So there was a small group of homeschooling families, people that wanted to homeschool, asked me if I supported homeschooling. And I really didn't know much about the issue. I grew up in private and public school, and all my kids have gone to public school, and I didn't think it was something that I would want to do, but these parents felt passionate about it. And so I'd met with them, kind of like I'm meeting with you, and they would share all their reasons and beliefs on why they wanted to have the opportunity to homeschool their children. And so it was through that process that I agreed to support homeschooling if I was elected. And then because of that response from them, then they worked on my campaign. So they helped me. So I don't know what came first. I think the fact that I committed to their issue, and because I was committed to their issue, they were going to commit to me to help get me elected. And I got elected, and I asked to be on the education committee, which handled this issue. And eventually, after a couple of years, Iowa did pass a homeschooling law that allowed for parents to homeschool as long as the parents were under the guidance of a certified teacher. And today, Marion School has a homeschool assistance program that's one of the best in the state. And if you talk to the homeschooling organizations, a lot of them hook up through Marion and have services and support from Marion. So that's an example. They didn't contribute any money to my campaign, but they did contribute to a volunteer effort for my campaign, and felt that I was going to continue to keep my word to them and pursue and support homeschooling. So that's an example of a group or organization that was very passionate about an issue. It took a few years to get it passed, and how I was influenced by that. And there's many times where there's issues where you don't have any exposure to that issue, that any good individual is going to try to learn and listen from people. And obviously, sometimes you can listen to people and only get one side of the viewpoint. And so I've been burned a few times myself when I would listen to individuals or a group and they're passionate about their issue, and then I agreed to support it. And then unfortunately, I didn't do enough research on the other side on why maybe that issue wasn't quite as clear-cut as the advocates for it. And so I really tried to make sure I have that balance in my decision-making between issues, especially when there's vocal people on both sides of the issue. Certainly, money has become much more influential in politics today than it ever has been. When I ran for the legislature, I think I spent about $18,000 for a state house. And that's to pay for your yard signs, and some radio ads, and flyers, and posters, things like that. Today, a competitive house seats goes for about $250,000. Now, for me, when I was running $18,000, I had several fundraisers, and most of that money I was able to raise locally. Today, there's no way any candidate can raise $250,000 locally. So they work hard and they raise some local money, and the rest of it comes in from the political action committees or the special interest. And now the political action committees don't have enough money to fund the races in Iowa. Their reach even goes beyond Iowa. So it's political action committees from outside of the state. And so you have this, what was really local people supporting that local candidate, to then statewide political actions committees filling. So if you need 250,000, you can only raise 20, you gotta get the other 230 someplace. And then it just continues to grow. And so the influence then, the money is playing a much greater role in politics today than I think that it ever has. Now, it hasn't seeped yet to the local level, and I hope that it doesn't. But I'm seeing signs to where it can seep to the local level. I'll just give you two examples. I always, historically, 90% of the time will side on local control. And the reason I like local control is you have much more access to your local elected officials than you do your state officials, than you do your federal officials. And when you can make decisions locally, then you just get more input from people. But there have been some issues where the local governments have tried to take some steps to respond to constituents. One just recently in our area was an effort on the minimum wage, where in Lynn County and Johnson County, and there were a couple other counties that wanted to move forward on the minimum wage and felt that there was local control of doing that. And then the state came in this last legislative session and basically took away the rights of all the local people from doing that. And you wonder, why did they do that? Well, the groups and organizations that have historically been against raising the minimum wage didn't want to have to go lobby 900 cities around the state, 900 councils and all these supervisors. So to make their lives easier, it's only had to influence 51 people in the House and 26 people in the Senate to take away that right. So that is an example of where you have state organizations or national organizations influencing at a local level. So it wasn't just that issue. It doesn't really matter where you were or weren't on the minimum wage. The whole process of taking away that local control, and there were 4 or 5 other issues. And again, whether you want gun rights or you want limitations on where you can carry your guns, it's irrelevant now because the state took that control away from cities. So in the past, if the city wanted to say, we don't want any guns coming into City Hall, or we think it's inappropriate to have guns in the library, we could have a local ordinance against that, but now you can't. So when the organizations at the state or federal level, you think, well, if they pass something that affects their government, then it's a little bit removed, but when it starts to affect our government, then I think there's too much influence from the donors in the political process. I don't know how you get rid of it. Both candidates for president talk about the influence of special interest and how there's too much influence, and they both had unique ways of advocating almost the same point. Bernie Sanders was one that really advocated for getting money out of politics, and he talked about it in his unique way. And of course, President Trump did the same thing, and he had some of his clever slogans of draining the swamp, but they were really both talking about the same thing, just articulating it different. And that's starting to have a big influence in Iowa, legislature. And I think you put restrictions on how much money is probably the way to go, but Supreme Courts have made some rulings. So you do have these powerful groups, but does that mean that the average citizen has lost their vote? And I'm always going to say no, the average citizen hasn't lost their voice, because they still have the power of one, and that is the vote. I have to earn your vote. At one point in time, I have to ask you to please vote for me as mayor or whatever office I might be running in, and that's where you have really your greatest say-so, is when a candidate is asking for your vote, because that's when you can go through your important issues and ask them what they think about that particular subject matter. Cedar Rapids has a lot of different groups and organizations that I don't know that I would say they're influence, but certainly they can have impact in what is being discussed, based on their particular interests. So I'll give you another example of a local issue. The home builders in Cedar Rapids, for years, Cedar Rapids had minimum soil requirements when you develop a lot. And you see this around town where have old farm fields or land that was purchased by a developer, and they fix it all up and put in the infrastructure, roads and streets, and then they sell lots in these subdivisions. And the requirement to put, I think it was 5 inches of soil is what the city eventually decided to do. They wanted to say to the developers, you want 5 inches of soil before you put on the grass. And it was all designed for us as a community in our overall water management strategy, just to allow more water to seep into the soil before it runs off the ground and into the streets where it causes street flooding. It's a simple issue, right? 4 inches, 5 inches, you could debate whether it should be 6 inches, but it took us, I think, 3 years to get that passed. And it took 3 years because, well, at first you have to organize a committee, right? And then the committee has to go out and study it. You've done that here at the church, haven't you? There's been an issue, and say, well, we're going to form a committee, and the pastor says, and the committee's going to get together, and then the committee gets together the first day, and then you're discussing, well, what's going to be our process here, and well, we're going to study this issue, and hope to have a recommendation in 6 months or 9 months. this was the same process that the city used. And everybody gets together and says, yeah, we're all in agreement on water management. It's a good subject matter, so everybody starts to agree at the very beginning meeting, and then eventually it started to get a little more divisive. But we got it passed. There's a lot of opposition from the home builders, and they laid out all different types of reasons why they couldn't put the topsoil back on, how it was going to cost more. You're going against your own policy, Mr. Mayor, trying to make homes more affordable, trying to get more people in home ownership, and you add to the cost of all this topsoil, you're actually defeating your goal of making home ownership more affordable. But we also had a goal of water management, especially after the flood. Most people agree on that overall goal. And eventually we got it passed, but because of that influence of the home builders, it took much longer to do, and there were certainly some concessions that had to be made along the way. Now, is that a bad organization? Are they a bad organization because they're a special interest group? Sometimes we hear the term special interest group, and I think in most minds it has a negative connotation. Whenever an elected official is on the other side of an issue with the group, they'll try to vilify that interest group by calling it a special interest group that is only concerned about their issue, that they're not concerned about the global good of the city or the county or the state or the federal government. But why did that? Why did eventually the home builders, if they were to look at that issue, they would have probably said they lost on the issue. They actually didn't really want to do it. They wanted to placate for a while, but they really didn't want to do it. But why did they lose? Because other people that maybe weren't necessarily organized like the home builders were also advocating for better water management in the city. And so that was one issue where me, starting off, I was probably neutral to maybe anti-requiring the topsoil. Because in my mind, more and more regulations and more cost. Because that was where my original bias was, as far as just my history of all the issues that I have been exposed to. You mentioned my Pepe's ice cream, and I remember trying to start Pepe's ice cream and the rules and regulations that I had to get over. At the time, they didn't allow street vending. Now it's the rage, everybody does it, street trucks all over the place. But in 1988, there were rules against trucks driving up and down the streets. And I had to work, through that, and had some other issues. So in my mind, my own personal experience, and then running the chamber and hearing all the business experience, adding more rules and regulations, more red tape, more requirements, was probably something that I was tilted to be against. But as I looked at the overall global good of the city, and that really wasn't an undue burden on the developer to put the topsoil at that level and what it meant for our city, I eventually then made my way over to supporting the resolution. So Matt, those are a couple issues like that homeschooling and the topsoil. The best way is to get one-on-one contacts if it's possible. And your mayor and city council people are very accessible, and they'll meet with anybody, and I meet with anybody. It's easy to meet with people when you're local. It's a little bit harder to take a trip to Des Moines and try to meet with someone at the state capitol. That's just a different environment because there's so many people there, and you're only going to get a slice of their time. So I would say any legislators, now's the time to be, meeting with them when they're not in session, when their calendar is a little more flexible. It's almost impossible to try to go to Des Moines and meet with them for, a few minutes. And of course, DC is nearly impossible, to try to get meetings. It's expensive to go all the way out there to see them, and, even when they're back, which they're not back that often, but even when they're back, it's almost, impossible to, get that one-on-one time with them. Well, I would say that you have an election coming up this November, and now's a great chance to interview all the candidates that are running for city council and mayor. We have a good crop of people that are running for mayor, and they all have good resumes, and they all have an idea what they want to do. And I know that each one of you has some specific issues that you're passionate about, and those candidates that support your issues are the ones that you should, advocate for and vote for, and tell others. Rod, talk long enough, 20 minutes. Yes, Ron.
Well, besides the issues, as we're trying to decide between candidates, what are the attributes, in addition to issues, that make for an effective mayor or make for an effective city council member?
Well, one attribute is how much time they're going to dedicate, to the job. The congressional people, they're full-time. The state legislators are part-time, and at the local level, we're considered part-time. But one, you need to, find out what they think they're going to dedicate from a time standpoint. I also think what type of style someone has. Don Canny was our longest-serving mayor in Cedar Rapids. And a lot of people, when they look back at his term at the local level, I always heard some people say, well, they didn't know if he was a Democrat or a Republican. Where Democrats that oftentimes thought he was Republican, and Republicans thought he was a Democrat. So he did a good job of, if he was partisan, he didn't show it. And I think that's one attribute at the local level that's important. It's much more important to me today than it was 8 years ago. Remember, I come from a partisan environment. I first got elected in '86 as a Republican. I ran on the Republican ticket, had a Republican primary, got elected, was Republican Speaker of the House. And these are highly partisan positions, less so back then than they are today. And believe that local government should be nonpartisan. So that's just a personal view that I have, but it may be one that you also share. And some people were concerned when I first announced that I was going to run for mayor. Are you going to be the Republican mayor, or are you going to be a mayor that's Republican? I kind of like what Mike Pence said earlier at one of the convention things. He said, I'm a Christian first, then I'm an American, then I'm a Republican. So he kind of put it in order of where his values were. And I would hope that the next mayor wouldn't be partisan. So that's something that I personally am going to be watching to see if it gets partisan or some candidates go down the route. Because I haven't made up my decision on who I'm going to vote for yet.
What about executive experience? To what extent were you an administrator or an executive or a top guy in an organization? To what extent would experience in that area be essential for a mayor?
Yeah, the question is the executive experience in the position as mayor. It was more important at the beginning of my term than it has been at the end of my term. And why is that? At the beginning of my term, we had some friction with the city manager, and we had to find a way to allow him to gracefully leave and then find a new city manager. So during those early months and year, a lot of the responsibility of the city manager, which is the day-to-day COO of the city, fell on my shoulders. And eventually, as Jeff Pomerantz came in and he was able to get his feet on the ground, a lot of that just transferred back to him. So as mayor, you're the political leader of the community, spokesperson of the community, and you lead the effort when it comes to policy discussion. It's really where the role of the mayor is served best, and then trying to guide the decisions on that policy through the council. But you also then oversee the city manager and making sure that the operations team is always in sync with the policy team. Oftentimes a strong COO, and Jeff Pomerantz is a strong COO, can have some conflict with the policy team. So keeping that to a minimum, making sure that you're on the same page. That wasn't the case when I got started. There was friction from the beginning, and something had to give, and it wasn't going to be me because I had just gotten elected. So obviously it was going to be the city manager, and he came to realize that needed to happen too. And 100 days into my administration is when he left, or 101. Clark, Pat?
To me, I think of process, and I think of the city charter that defines the process of how voters speak to power, and the board and commissions. And I served on the infill committee, and the flood came, and our committee got put aside, and a new committee got formed, and that's a control issue that is debatable. But then the other thing I would talk about would be voting systems and the instant runoff kind of option, where there was the Chuck Swore election where he lost by a few votes, and then we had the runoff and the turnout on each of those elections and the cost. So those two issues are both interesting to me, and I don't know which one you would prefer to address first.
Yeah, well, I'll address them both. Clark's first issue, dealing with infill, is something that really accelerated in Cedar Rapids because so much of our core had been devastated. But every town around the country, growing towns, have been confronted with what we call urban sprawl, and where the developers, the speculators on the perimeter of town that have land, they want to buy that land, develop it. So there's always this pressure then for towns to just grow geographically. And many times it's at the expense of themselves, and they don't realize it. Because oftentimes the growth, yes, you have new growth of new people coming in, but oftentimes the perimeter growth has been at the expense of the core. And cities around the country were realizing this and says, we're like donuts, and started to spend more time at infill and the core. And it's a long process to switch your whole economic development strategy and your growth strategy from going this way to, growing from the inside out. But because of the flood, that really got us to focus on that. So all of our housing programs for, I think, almost 6 years, Clark, were all focused on the core and rebuilding in the core. That didn't stop some of the perimeter growth, but we weren't incentivizing any of the perimeter growth. And I think that's been healthy for our town to see new homes go up in the time check area, homes go up in Wellington Heights and on the southeast side, and then businesses follow. So overall, that's been healthy for our community, and the tax base was rebuilt in Cedar Rapids. In many cases, it helped bring the rest of the tax base up. Now, whether we can hold that strategy long-term, I don't know. That's a good question for, the next mayor and council, because we're completing Highway 100. It's going to be done in 2018, and there'll be a lot of ribbons being cut about that. Highways, been on our drawing board. But what do you think that's naturally going to do when you have Highway 100 on the west side? I mean, it's naturally going to what? People are going to want to go develop on a lot of those green fields. So in many cases, it's going to maybe have us flip back to urban sprawl like that. So this is a good question for the next council. And then your second issue, and then I'll get to a follow-up question. Clark's concerned about how we vote when there's multiple candidates in a race. And it's not a big problem now, but in the future, I think he's, in many ways, Clark, 20 years from now, because we just added the Libertarian Party. So they're an organized party now for the state. And historically, you only had like 2 parties. And so when someone won, someone would always get 50% plus 1 when you have 2. When you get other candidates and parties, you end up drawing the top person goes below 50%. And in Iowa, in Cedar Rapids, it happens sometimes. And in our system, we'll vote in November for mayor. And there's 5 or 6 people running for mayor. So mathematically, when there's 5 people running, the chances of someone getting 50% plus 1 are low. And then in our system, the top 2 people go to the runoff election in December. And the general election always has a higher turnout. And the runoff election always has a much lower turnout because it comes in December, right between Thanksgiving and the Christmas, Hanukkah holiday. So the turnout is low, so you have maybe 8% of your people deciding who the next mayor's going to be. And in Clark's system, he talks about you vote for like your first choice, and then you vote for your second choice. And then as it's all tabulated, it runs up to the top person. Let me ask Ed, and then I'll get to you, Mr.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, a couple of decades ago, most people, at least many, considered to be a shoo-in for governor. And I know the 5 reasons you decided not to run, but I'm curious, today, those 5 are both scattered and you have the rest of the family. How does the rest of your family feel about your run, and particularly if you have another business?
I did announce that I was running for governor on June 20th. And you're right, when 1998, after Governor Branstad retired and Governor Vilsack got elected, and a lot of people at the time thought that I should run for governor. And they said, it's your turn, it's your turn. And it may have been my turn, but it wasn't my time. And it wasn't my time because I had these young kids at home, and I wanted to make sure that I raised those young kids. Now, 20 years later, I feel it's my time. My family's grown. I've got more experience, business experience at the chamber, and also this time as mayor. So now it's my turn. I don't know if it's my turn. So it was my turn, not my time. Now it's my time. Don't know if it's my turn. It's up to the voters to decide. Now, I'm a bit of a underdog. There's nobody that will argue that point. And the case that I've been trying to make to Republican voters around the state is you should decide who the next governor it is. It shouldn't be an appointment or an anointment process. So the Branstad era has come to a close. We always knew the governor wasn't going to run for re-election and that there was going to be an open primary on both the Republican and on the Democrat side. We also knew that Governor Branstad had a favorite, that he was going to pick and choose and advocate for Kim Reynolds to be his successor, his heir apparent. So that she was always going to have a little bit of an edge in an open primary. My view, nothing's really changed except she's filling out the term. The dynamics changed a little bit because she has the official title of governor versus lieutenant governor, but I still see it as an open seat and think that the primary process is healthy because you have candidates that are competing for your vote. But the establishment in Des Moines doesn't see it that way. And they'd rather get behind her because I guess they feel she's a known quantity. And so she has an early start on money and establishment endorsements. I don't know how far that gets a candidate. Endorsements are important, I suppose. But in the big scheme of things, at least for governor historically, is people like to get to know their governor, kick the tires, so to speak. And as I've been traveling around, I think people are very receptive to the primary, and they're not against me because I'm challenging an incumbent. So far I feel comfortable with what I've been talking about, not just from an Iowa standpoint, but the reception I've been getting. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good.
Phil?
I had one thing I wanted to say. The Army Corps of Engineers, as of 2 years ago, put Cedar Rapids on the bottom of a list of things to do, like for the flood. Was the city going to do anything about convincing the Army Corps of Engineers to come in and do something so the 2005 flood doesn't happen again? We're like at the bottom of the list. East Coast, West Coast, everywhere else up ahead of us.
Yeah, so Bill's question about the Army Corps of Engineers. If I had to say biggest disappointment in my time as mayors, we haven't made further progress on our flood protection system. I really thought that, coming in, that we had a good case to make to the federal government on why Cedar Rapids should be funded for our flood protection system. We really had this, what I thought was a comprehensive approach to local funding, federal funding, and state funding, this three-legged stool. The federal funding seemed to be like the easiest leg to put together. It was the smallest funding piece. And we had some early successes by getting approval of the Corps and approval of Congress. We've been approved twice by Congress. They say that this is the least productive Congress in a long time because they don't pass anything. Our bill passed twice. It was signed, by the president twice. We just haven't been appropriated the money. So it's been a struggle on the federal fund. The Corps is receptive to working and building the flood protection system, but they just don't have the resource been appropriated. It's like I tell my son, you're authorized to go to college next year. He says, great, Dad, I'm looking forward to it. Are you going to give me any money to go? No, but you're authorized to go.
Couldn't we come up with an idea of our own and pay for it ourselves?
Yeah. We did come up with a couple ideas of our own. We came up with an idea at the state level where the Cedar Rapids community gets reimbursed a portion of the sales tax. You see that as a city council, we've focused on retail to a greater degree than retail had ever been focused on in the city. Those of you that follow local politics remember when Lee Clancy was mayor and there was a Hy-Vee store on First Avenue and they were going to shut it down and the city had to get involved and provide some incentive financing to get Hy-Vee to build a new store. People said that was a slippery slope because they were incentivizing retail. And that was probably like the last retail that got incentivized. But we've been aggressive at incentivizing retail, specifically the Westdale Mall redevelopment project. And the reason that we're doing that is because this deal that we made with the state, we get reimbursed part of the sales tax that's collected. So all the sales tax generated in Cedar Rapids that goes to the state, a portion of that comes back to us, and then we're using that to build flood protection. So when you drive down around New Bow, that's the money that we're using, is the state reimbursement. And that's why the city council is focusing on retail. And we have a 20-year deal with them, with the state. And that's what we're basically using. And of course, at the local level, we tried twice to get flood protection passed, the penny sales tax. Our first plan was do it part streets and part flood protection, and that came up short. And then the second was all flood protection, and that came up short. No, looking back, I don't know if those votes were too close to the flood, we needed more time after the flood. But I really believe that the flood was so devastating and so off the chart, off the norm, that honestly, most people thought it would never happen again. Because that was a flood of biblical proportions, 2,000-year floods. They just couldn't believe it could happen again. And of course, in 2016, many people that felt it couldn't happen again are saying, oh no, it's happening again. But we're going to keep pushing, and I know the next mayor, all of them that are running, all feel the same way about flood protection, that we have to keep pushing the federal government on that.
When you become our governor, I'd like to see two things happen.
Okay?
I'd like to see this casino that we were gonna, well, I'm not involved in it. I'd like to see that thing get built the way it was advertised it was gonna happen. And the second thing that I would like to see happen is a ban in the state of Iowa concerning consumer fireworks. I want to see that eliminated and something seriously done to anybody that violates it. If we're going to put the limit, the way I heard the gossip, whether it's true or not, when we were looking to punish our panhandlers with a fine upwards of $600 and some odd with a visit in the state or in the jail around here somewhere, they're going to put them in there for 30 days. You see, if I'd like to see something eliminated totally and something seriously done to support it, is to eliminate those fireworks.
Well, let me take both of those questions.
I have another comment. Well, I have to think about it. I forgot what it was.
Well, I'll talk for a couple minutes. I'll give you a chance to. You know, during my whole time in the legislature, they had the fireworks advocates, down there every year, and I never supported that. They could never get the votes for it. But this year, one of these examples of this organization that worked hard during the legislative process, and I'm sure they were probably involved in a couple key legislative districts. But in life, on any issue, it takes a champion that's just going to be relentless about their pursuit to get something done. We may not really know too much about instant runoff, but Clark is committed to being a champion on that issue. He's just going to keep working it and working it and working it. So in the legislature, they had several legislators that were champions of legalizing fireworks. So they would bring all the displays and kind of show them what they were going to, have, and they couldn't get the votes. And at the end of the session, they finally were able to get the votes. Now, in a society, we would probably use a different term for it, but in the legislative process, they call it horse trading. And they were going to use the money from the sales tax of all the fireworks sold to add some employees at the crime unit up in Ankeny at the DCI. Now, I'm not only voting for legalizing fireworks, but I'm going to help solve some crimes at the DCI. So they basically got extra votes to put that on. You saw a Des Moines Register poll, a lot of people supported fireworks, and then after the season, it's split, 50-50. The city of Cedar Rapids decided to mirror the state. We always said that we'd relook at the ordinance after the first year, and we're targeted to do that on August 22nd. So we'll probably shrink the number of days down to 1 or 2, either before or after the 4th of July. And the second period is over the Christmas, New Year's. So if you didn't like what happened over 4th of July, you're probably not going to like what's coming up in December. So we're going to probably shrink that time. Our big challenge as a city is we can't prevent the tents from popping up and selling them. So as long as they can sell over a month period, it's going to be very difficult to enforce, even if we narrow it to 3 days. Even towns that banned it still had problems and complaints. So we're trying to figure out the best way to inform the public about what our local ordinance is. Maybe as someone buys fireworks, then you have to put a sheet in there, some marketing piece that explains, what the city ordinance is. But I've already advocated that the legislator need to shrink down that window of selling. On your other issue of the casino, that is one that the Racing and Gaming Commission is a 5-member board appointed by the governor.
That's why I think we could easily get that.
The governor has a lot of influence over the people that go on the boards and commissions. And some of these boards and commissions are more important than others. Do you think the Board of Regents is an important position? They govern the University of Iowa, Iowa State, and UNI. Important board. That board decides if there's going to be any tuition increases or not. And a couple of months ago, they decided there was going to be a 5% tuition increase at the universities. So oftentimes these boards and commissions have a lot of leeway and a lot of power. Imagine that they're deciding, this group of 7 unelected people are deciding a 5% increase in tuition for families of kids, sending their kids, sending to university schools. The Racing and Gaming Commission has a lot of power too. They have the sole power to authorize casino license.
Vote out the casino.
What's that?
Vote out the casino.
Yeah, in Cedar Rapids, our voters voted for it, and that vote is good for 8 years. So it's an 8-year window that Cedar Rapids has a chance to get a license. If the license isn't granted in that 8-year window, there would be exactly what you said, a re-vote on whether we'd still want to have the possibility for a license. So we're, halfway through that 8-year period. Time goes by fast. And then your follow-up question, comment was?
I can't remember.
Well, you have to get to service at 10 o'clock. I really enjoyed our time together. I hope it met, Ron, the overall arching theme of today's discussion. So you might want to bring in the candidates over the course of the next couple months to hear what the next mayoral people, because the mayor can have a lot of influence in the community, not just on public policy, but just the overall tone and tenor of the debate and how we accomplish things. And I think as hopefully any mayoral candidate, going forward, doesn't bring some of this toxic aspects of partisanship that we see in Washington, D.C. and a little bit now in the state of Iowa. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.